Happy Halloween, everybody. This is my first Halloween as a YouTuber, so I thought I'd do something a little different. Today, we will be discussing the 10 scariest games that you can play for this season's festivities. These are my personal selection and are sure to keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, I know what game you all think is going to be referenced first, but no, I can't put Luigi's Mansion 3 into the video. I want to provide games that are unsettling and scary for a player, but Luigi's Mansion is just a step too far. I can't be responsible for anybody being unable to sleep for weeks, so I'm just gonna have to leave it out. But in all seriousness, it is a great game to play if you want to get into the spirit of Halloween but don't like things too scary. Likewise, I want to give a shout out to Until Dawn and all of the supermassive games like Man of Eden, Little Nightmares 1 and 2, The Quarry, and all their other couch co-op story driven games. These are fantastic games to play with family or friends and perfect for Halloween. Before I go into the 10, I just want to cover some honourable mentions. Resident Evil 2 Remake was a particularly scary experience and was a really fantastic example of how to do a remake right. Resident Evil 8 Village is certainly worth a mention too. Although it wasn't as scary as its predecessor, there is one scene which I do consider one of the scariest scenes in gaming. Resident Evil 4 Remake is quite scary in places too, but this list is reserved for those games which are really scary. So without further ado, let's get into the 10 scariest games you can play on Halloween. Quick side note, if you're new here and you enjoy the video, please consider subscribing. If you feel that I have missed any games, let me know in the comments. Outlast. Outlast follows journalist Miles Upshur as he investigates a psychiatric hospital run by a sinister corporation. Armed only with a camcorder for night vision, players must navigate dark hallways while avoiding murderous patients. The game's emphasis on evasion rather than combat intensifies the sense of vulnerability, with jump scares and disturbing visuals creating a constant nerve-wracking tension. The hospital setting, filled with eerie sounds and nightmarish visuals, brings a relentless sense of dread that few games manage to match. Madison. In this psychological horror, players control Luca, a young man trapped in a supernatural nightmare tied to a haunted camera. With only a flashlight, Luca must solve cryptic puzzles and survive encounters with terrifying entities. Madison manipulates the player's perception of reality, using audio cues and subtle changes in the environment to disorient and scare. The constant threat and sense of the unknown creates an atmosphere that feels intensely personal and inescapable, tapping into deep psychological fears. Number 3. Alien Isolation. Set in the Alien universe, the game follows Amanda Ripley as she searches for her mother aboard a seemingly abandoned space station. The AI-controlled alien stalks throughout the entire game, forcing players to rely on stealth and strategic use of tools to survive. The game's design amplifies suspense with a meticulous focus on sound. Every creak and hiss will keep the player on edge. The unpredictability of the aliens' movements makes every encounter unique, creating a horror experience that's as much about survival as it is about dread. It is well known as one of the most scariest games of all time. Visage. Visage immerses players in a haunted house where they must unravel tragic, disturbing backstories of former residents. The game blends elements of psychological horror with supernatural scares, using disturbing imagery and minimalistic sound design to unsettle the player. Its slow pace builds tension gradually, leaving players in a constant state of unease. The lack of clear objectives adds to the helplessness, while each room feels alive with memories and horrors, making it an intense, atmospheric experience. Silent Hill 2. The classic Silent Hill 2 for the PlayStation 2 is well known as one of the greatest horror games of all time. The remastered version is potentially even better and even more scary. A classic psychological horror, Silent Hill 2 tells the story of James Sunderland, who searches for his wife in a fog-covered town filled with grotesque creatures. The game's surreal environment and unsettling symbolism tap into themes of grief, guilt, and existential dread. Its haunting soundtrack and distorted visuals add to the unease, creating a story-driven horror that resonates on an emotional level. The town of Silent Hill itself feels like a character, embodying James' inner turmoil and amplifying the fear. If you want to know more about this game, check out this video I did when I reviewed the Silent Hill 2 remake. Deadspace. Another game that was recently remade, and it scored incredibly. It lived up to the hype of what the original managed to capture. In Deadspace, players step into the role of Isaac Clarke, an engineer on a spaceship overrun by necromorphs, the mutated corpses of the crew. The game's strategic dismemberment mechanic, which requires players to shoot off limbs to kill enemies, adds a brutal next layer to the combat. Dead Space's eerie silence, broken only by the groans of the ship, creates a suspenseful atmosphere, while the confined space and limited resources heighten the tension. The sci-fi horror setting and terrifying enemies make it a landmark survival horror. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Resident Evil 7 takes a first-person perspective as players control Ethan Winters, who is searching for his missing wife in a Louisiana plantation occupied by a murderous family. The game marks a return to the series' roots with limited resources, terrifying enemies, and a focus on exploration. Its photorealistic graphics and haunting setting make each encounter feel real and horrifying. As players try to navigate dark hallways and face grotesque foes, the sense of isolation and fear feels unrelenting. After releasing Resident Evil 6, which was more action-orientated, to see Resident Evil go back to what made their game so scary in the first place, Resident Evil 7 is one of the best games that they've made. Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Set in a child's bedroom, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 requires players to survive 5 nights by keeping the animatronics out, relying on sound cues and brief glimpses in the dark. The game's simplicity amplifies its horror, with nothing but a flashlight for defense. Players are left vulnerable to sudden jump scares. The tension of waiting in silence and listening for footsteps or breathing makes each night terrifying, as the animatronics become increasingly aggressive, playing on primal fears of being hunted. PT. Though only a demo, PT left a lasting impact. Players walk through a looping hallway solving obscure puzzles while encountering a terrifying ghost named Lisa. The game's cryptic design, combined with realistic graphics and disturbing visuals, creates an atmosphere of paranoia. With each loop, subtle changes makes players question what's real, and Lisa's sudden appearances are terrifying. Its cancellation only added to its legacy as one of the scariest experiences, leaving fans to imagine the horrors that might have followed. Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Set in a dark, labyrinth castle, Amnesia follows protagonist Daniel as he tries to uncover his past while avoiding horrific monsters. Players cannot fight back, forcing them to hide or run, which intensifies the fear. The sanity mechanic, where darkness and terrifying sights deteriorate Daniel's mental state, adds psychological depth. Its atmosphere, chilling sound design, and sense of isolation makes Amnesia a pioneer in horror gaming, with an experience that sticks long after the game is over. These games are uniquely effective at creating immersive and unsettling atmospheres, whether through survival elements, psychological tension, or pure jump scares. Each one leaves players feeling haunted long after they've put down the controller. So these are my top 10 games, in no particular order, that I consider the scariest. These games know how to mess with the player psychologically and thrive at making the player always feel on edge. If you want to celebrate Halloween this year in style, get the lights off, get some headphones on, and I dare you to play any of these games. Anyway, that's it for this one, but what do you guys think? Do you agree with my list? Which games would you add or change? And what is the scariest game that you've ever played? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I'm Av Gaming, where we do video game analysis, what makes great games great, and what could make good games great as well. Thanks for watching. Happy Halloween. Av out.